Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. Let me know if you can hear me. If I can go
Yeah,
ahead.
we can hear you well.
Yes, we can hear you. All right, thank you. So basically, what we want to do is protect our biodiversity. And we're concerned with such issues as food security. But somehow we seem to have forgotten about the so-called eighth wonder of the world, field protection forest belts. We did have some informal meetings to discuss this topic with other colleagues, and like I said, we often call this the eighth wonder of the world, meaning that it has great significance for us today in terms of food safety and biodiversity protection. So these belts is what we haven't heard from the Soviet Union, even though we started planting them like 200 years ago. And then they were used in the Soviet Union as well, and they helped a lot with the yields. And so if it gives us 20 to 30% increase on the yield alone, without applying any other additional solutions, this is definitely worth discussing. And we need more forest belts, especially where the lay of the land is such as what you can see, similar to what you can see on the slide, when there's a lot of wind affecting the soil. So these belts basically serve as windbreakers. And I would say that there are different angles to look at it, other angles as well. Look at how big those fields are. I personally have certain doubts regarding the windbreaking capacity of these belts, given the size of the area. I mean, windbreaking might be and is obviously one of the functions they perform, but there are others as well. I know today that there's air turbulence effect on the fields, meaning that when the wind is moving above these fields and the belts, the higher that belt is, the better the chances that they would break the wind. And then it starts whirling those Ekman spirals into those spirals. And so it doesn't have to be 1 kilometer up where the clouds are. Even if you have no, say, rain clouds above your head, it might still rain on you, specifically and precisely because of those spirals. And it takes 10 to 12 heights of the forest belt. In other words, this is how we could irrigate the area in a dry season. And as we know, those arid conditions is something that we've been getting quite a lot of lately. So moving on, let me just say that there is this one thing that makes forest belts beneficial in particular. They protect the plant and animal species, even though Their area is sometimes insignificant compared to the size of the area they are protecting. Plus, they are helping us protect our crops from pests as well by capturing those pests and preventing them from, say, propagating. Say we have a wheat field. This is where this could be very much useful. I graduated in 1976. This was the time when we were exploring this topic very actively. And there was a lot of discussion about how the forest belts can help us protect our biodiversity. And that was believed to be the main, say, precondition of a successful field. And there was also this mass research later on about biodiversity. It was covered in the media quite a bit. Even though about 70% of our lands are tilled, and there are other environmental concerns that apply. So it turned out that in Ukraine, if we look at our overall biodiversity, it compares actually to the rest of Europe. And that was attributed largely to the forest belts serving as sort of reservoir for the biodiversity. But that does not exhaust the list. It is just that we need to understand how this works. And by we, by us, I mean not just Ukraine. At some point I visited friends, and I could see how abandoned those forest belts actually looked, and the local farmers just couldn't understand. They failed to understand why they were supposed to worry about these things. So there has to be more awareness. We need to do something to raise it, because in terms of protecting our ecosystems and their biodiversity, this is a huge resource in terms of migration, different kinds of animal species. They could actually be introduced to our fields, to our lands, and help us save our crops from pests. This is an example of a forest belt that I was referring to earlier. This is just not what it's supposed to look like. This is what it's supposed to look like. It has to be at least 30 to 40 meters wide and extend thousands of kilometers forward. So there are certain nuances that we need to keep in mind. And like I said, research has been done, and it is still happening, and we need to build on those findings. This is, as you can see, a forest belt with a flowering herbaceous plants. It might not be the widest it could be, but still, it's something. See how tilled the land is? Tell me, are those extra, say, couple meters that important to till? It is almost in the root area, as you can see in this picture, bordering with the soil. It's not really great for planting crops, those few meters. But if you leave a belt, if you leave some plants on it, this is where these organisms could live, because otherwise it is just some digger wasps, some solitary bees that can survive. But that would be all. But their contribution is actually invaluable. By the way, there was another research, again, global scale one, that actually found what the ratio is of people to wasps and people to bees. By wasps, I mean those, bigger kind. Somehow we don't like wasps, and we seem to exterminate them altogether without actually trying to understand how this whole thing works. So as you can see from this table, somehow those forest belts with protective herbaceous plants can contain like 10 times more of what the belt can contain without those herbaceous plants that would grow on those few meters. And I know that you all probably know that, but the smaller the species, the higher intensity of its metabolism is. I mean, it actually needs more energy, and the smaller they are, the more, say, active their past elimination capacity, the bigger it would be. And our wasps could be as little as 2 millimeters long, and they carry their eggs, and then they leave them in the grass, in the leaves of the grass. But if there is no grass, if everything is stilled, then they would need to find a place and lay their eggs elsewhere in order to propagate. And so this total ignorance, if you will, about how wasps operate is really striking. And those researchers, by the way, carried out this fantastic experiment. They had this like a museum castle in the UK where, as far as possible, wasps were exterminated completely. And by wasps, we mean something at least 1 centimeter long, something that you can see. And those digger wasps were also exterminated. And so next year, you could actually compare it to Africa or Australia in terms of how many flies they would have and how many pests. It was literally impossible to breathe without the wasps and the job that they were doing. So we need to be very cautious about this. We need to know how this works, and we need to know why those forest belts and those herbaceous plants next to them are important. There are different solutions that, those solutions can take different forms, but something has to be there, because this is sort of a grid that our biodiversity actually relies on and is contained in. Now, there have been some challenges with the legal framework as well. There's been direct destruction of the forest belts. There's been extensive tilling. And as a result, we have lost a lot of our protective capacity. Here on this slide, you can see a brief summary of the article that I was referring to. So those solitary bees and digger wasps at some point have stopped actually performing as entomophags. And the state of the forest belt has deteriorated. because in the past, they were taken care of by foresters who actually knew how to operate the belts. See, this is Xylocopa, a solitary bee, but people take it as a blue fly of some sort, and they immediately try to catch it and kill it. But it is not a fly, it is a bee that performs a unique function that more people should know about. If you have flowering legumes with big flowers, such as for example beans, the yield would depend actually on the presence of Xylocopa in the vicinity, because these guys are able to pollinate um, all of your all of your crop successfully. And it would take a dry tree somewhere around, because that, as you know, we try to upkeep our gardens and we try to cut off any dry branches that we perceive as dead. We try to remove it immediately to prevent pests, from living there. But as we later on learned, that would not actually present any danger to other organisms. Now, this beautiful beetle that you can see on the slide, these guys, they are directly dependent on the availability of dry wood. But I could of course go on and on about this, because everything is dependent on everything, and everything works together with the rest of everything. This is how our environment operates, and our duty is to help maintain this diversity that we've inherited, say, 30 years ago after the breakup of the Soviet Union, and we need to build on that instead of destroying it. So we need to think about how to revive our forest belts. Again, research has been carried in this area, quite resource consuming research by Eco Poltava NGO. It was titled as a revival of forest belts. Analytical note on this research was also attached. So somehow those forest belts were abandoned. They didn't have any owner for 20 years, and then the remaining 10 years they were actually part of communal property. And so the owners of that land, when they would get that title, they would destroy forest belts. That was the first thing that they did in order to have more land for tilling. But this has to be illegal. This might be even more important than raising that awareness. It just has to be prohibited. It has to be illegal, regardless of whether people understand why. There are other NGOs of Ukraine, different organizations and groups who advocated for this. But as far as I know, we didn't really have much improvement, haven't had at least so far. I know that the academia is actively exploring this issue. I know that 39.8 billion hryvnias, this is the estimated value of the forest belts as they found it to be. If you cut it and use it as firewood, it would give you only 117.3 million hryvnias per year. So obviously, this is just a tiny fraction of all those benefits that you could get. So their value is not about giving you energy as firewood. It is much more complex than that. It is about the interaction, with the atmospheric, with the atmosphere, with the air, and other benefits. There are other benefits as well. So we need to protect our biodiversity. And as practitioners, we're already thinking about restoring and remediating our lands after the war. And so if we have those forest belts cross-cutting our lands, actually merging together different kinds of landscapes and subsystems, that would be our desired result. That would give us something to build on, something to rely on, to protect our biodiversity, to restore our nature in general. This would really help us achieve all those goals. Soil fertility too, by the way, because when you have your nature operating the way it's supposed to operate, it will take care of the rest, including soil fertility. Now, onto the forest belts themselves. This could also be a driver of your food safety initiatives. There are different kinds of forest belts that you could potentially have. It could look like something like this. So when you think about starting a forest belt or, say, repairing what's already there, you could think about introducing different kinds of plants, different kinds of crops, something that is fit for growing in your part of the of the area. You could arrange it as layers, even depending on the height, say, of the crops. I actually saw once how they were growing vegetables, how they were growing vegetables in such forest belts, and it didn't even require any additional effort, such as beetroot, for example. So the same way we're arranging our forest gardens elsewhere, we could also work on the forest belts. There are so-called plant guilds that Pavlo helped us translate from English into Ukrainian. I mean, there's even a publication about that is translated into Ukrainian, and it explores specifically how different plant species can interact to ensure best productivity. Now, onto our cities. We want to protect biodiversity in our cities as well. As we know, plants and animals, plant and animal species, they are in syntropy. And this is an ongoing process. And objectively, since we are taking more and more land as cities, plus the lands that we are cultivating for agricultural purposes, we are driving some species out, which means that we need to set up alternative, say, areas for them, or give them alternative conditions for existence in order to coexist with them. Somehow, We know that there's been research that animal, for example, traditionally wild, can be found in big cities, as martens, for example, in Kiev. You can also find fox species near other Ukrainian cities. I personally have no issue with that. I mean, having a marten somewhere in the city where I'm living, but we need to make sure generally that our cities actually have the capacity for that coexistence to continue. In this picture, you can see what our typical cities look like currently. So our forest belts, they play an important role, and we spoke about it at this big ecological forum that took place in Kiev in 2011. They started out really great, and then somehow eventually it just died out. So on that forum, we spoke about the forest belts, and this idea received a lot of great feedback. It was actually included in the suggestions that the forum later on submitted to the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. So those suggestions included the development of forest belts in and around our cities for biodiversity, for better species migration, and such.
That would allow to create us a habitat areas and ecological strips or corridors or in the city. And that would also facilitate ecological environmental education among the population, the citizens. This would also resolve an issue of staying for the winter for many birds, many animals, because more and more animals, fewer and fewer birds and fewer animals migrate for the winter, and they need to somewhere to stay. And those bird feeding houses, those are just not enough. And those are also since it's like an island of heat, that facilitate to reduce the heat that is produced of the city. We have a very noble initiatives to plant 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000 of trees, whatever we feel like. In here, we need to change the wording. We can formally plant trees, and the authorities would just report formally that we've planted some trees. The next year, those trees are going to die, and we can plant again, and that would be spending money. But we need to focus our efforts. Where do we plant trees? There are so many steppe areas that were covered with such trees, and a steppe is an ecosystem of its own. It's a crime to plant trees there. It's a crime against the nature of Ukraine. I know a lot of doctors, a lot of professors in agriculture that say, well, yes, steppe, we need to cover it with the forest. Steppe is something that shouldn't exist. Let's turn it into a forest. Unfortunately didn't contradict, didn't speak truth to them, because I was shocked. How can you think like that in the modern age? We need to focus the initiatives on restoring the wood blocks under guidance, proper guidance of experts that know how a wood belt, a forest belt needs to be or arranged. One point to highlight here. There are varied wooden belts. The ones that are permeable for the wind, they are not very important. The other ones that are eco corridors, we need an a, a, a root there, an anchor there that would grow and that would facilitate the biodiversity conserving role. And that could be a tree that is underestimated in our country. And foresters, they say, once there is a planting period, they ask, what kind of a million trees are you talking? In those chopped wood logs that we conduct every year, we plant millions of young trees. Not anymore, of course, but they don't plant these. While the common oak is something very valuable, why don't the foresters like it? It's very non-resistant to uh, pests. It loses half of its leaf mass over a season, but they restore. They get restored very quickly after a rain. What does it mean that they are damaged by pests? Those pests, they transform the leaf biomaterial into their own biomaterial and pass it to other nutritional levels, trophic levels. The oak is not an exciting tree. It grows slowly. It produces fruits after 20 years, but those acorns are eaten by everyone, consumed by everyone. Even people can eat it. We just need to cook them, prepare them, and process them properly. It's a very, it produces very expensive wood, and it's a champion of biodiversity. As for the pests, we can see some uh, insects like this caterpillar that sticks to such formations. That's one of the pests. It looks scary, but any animals that are capable of finding such a stream, such a line of caterpillars, those animals eat this caterpillar with pleasure. The other one, the one on the right-hand side, that looks like a snake. So it has this. Oh, so the first one, the one on the left, it looks like a snake. So this convoy or a column of caterpillars. It's like a a snake. It's a defensive mechanism because most animals are scared of snakes at a genetic level. So that's some sort of a defense mechanism. But those animals who are not scared of this caterpillar anymore, they eat it with pleasure. The one on the right-hand side, this caterpillar, it is masked. So you can see this fat fermented uh, biomaterial that comes from the oak. It comes to upper nutrition levels. And the biodiversity is depends on this biomaterial. Also, once there's a hole in a trunk, for instance, a branch died and there's a hollow or a tree hollow. For 10 years, this tree hollow can serve as a house, as a home for varied animals, and then it recovers. There are also corridors that rot out in the tree, and this tree hollow gets healed by the oak. So there is an externally gets healed, but on the inside there's a lot of corridors that still can serve as home for varied forms of life. And these oaks, they can live for thousands of years. We need to treat it properly, not just put some cement or concrete in those tree hollows. We need to facilitate its healing. That's the worst when they do that, and we need to protect oaks from such vandalism. You can see that this oak is a monument, and it's going to live for 1,000 more years. It's going to be a host for wildcats, for lynxes, for a variety birds. Next Another product that is a very valuable product that facilitates the oak facilitates survival of bats. Our bats are all red book animals. It facilitates, it provides when bats hide on oaks, whether on the oak itself or in its branches, they at night, and I saw that myself, at night they crawl up and down the trunk of the tree, catching the insects that live in the core, in the bark of the tree. Another tree that is for some reason omitted, it's not white, it's not being spread in Ukraine, but it grows in the fields, it grows in even in urban areas. It's the linden. It's an edible tree that can be used as a food product for people and for animals, and the green fertilizer that is produced by the leaves, it boosts fertility of the soil. So it's a reserve for soil remediation, soil improvement, unless, of course, those leaves are removed and disposed of somewhere. Those nuts that remain on the tree, on the branches, they used to be used in confectionery products to produce sweets. They are very valuable in their composition, and they are very nutrition rich. That is very valuable for those creatures that live in wood belts. Apart from this, we can see this red oak. We can see that we can see a lot of advertisement where you plant red oak instead of our normal oak. Why? Why do foresters love it? Because it's resilient to pests. And you can see a lot of interviews when we plant new trees instead of the chopped down wood blocks. And foresters say, well, yeah, it's a great tree, great to have it, which is a invasive plant, and it's resilient to pests. It grows quickly, it produces fruits within 5 years, which makes all the creatures happy. But its acorns are not even consumed by really hungry wild boars. And it's a bad signal. If no one eats its leaves or its fruits, they must be toxic. Unfortunately, I didn't find any sources, any scientific or public sources on the chemical composition of the leaves and acorns that come from this oak. The wood that it produces is low quality wood, and it destroys biodiversity. So I urge stop using this kind of oak, and those stop planting it. Stop planting this harmful, very beautiful, very colorful in summer, but harmful plants. We can achieve the same kind of beautiful plants by using other plants. Like sorbus. One more point I wanted to pay attention to in the areas adjacent to the wood belts, we need to have a pointy brush, very dense brush for birds nesting. Those would scare away not just these beautiful children that are very interested and keen in having a look inside a bird's nest. Can I maybe pick out a bird from there? So that brush is going to serve as a protector. So we could use drows Such brush protects the wood block area from stray dogs, stray cats, hedgehogs, foxes, anything that preys on bird nests. And maybe I don't think everyone knows that our most favorite pets, such as cats, are the worst enemies of the nature. And it's been like this from ever since cats appeared, even those that are flat cats, and even not just the ones that live in the villages. They don't seem like very much of a prey animals, but they are they have a tendency to just walk away from the house. They leave it and depart as far as hundreds, tens of kilometers, definitely, sometimes even hundreds of kilometers from their accommodation, and they just went to chill out. And they are picking out everything that they can reach to, under the trees, on the trees. So the most damage caused to the nature in Ukraine, in Australia, in New Zealand is caused by pet cats. Such brush would be able to protect those birds nesting in the wood belts from the cats. Roses specifically, not just wild roses, but not just rose hips, but roses, they blossom before it gets cold, and their flowers are edible and very nutritional. And there is no point to thermally protect them. So they also have to be present as a food reserve for people, which is, it's not obvious, but it works. And a small part of those fruit trees that can be used in wood belts, forest belts, and it's confirmed on practice, it's confirmed by experience, that includes sweet cherry, mulberry, nuts. For some reason, sweet cherry produces fascinating results in wood belts. In lower levels, it's we need varied pointy brush, like those could serve as azote fixing plants, and such trees as pea trees, pea shrubs. They can serve as food resources, and such component is almost absent in our forest belts. And something that is also missing in there is grapes. Having grapes in the vine grapes, especially in the wood belts, is a safety and protection measure. It adds resistivity to winds, and it's also a nutritional deposit for people and for animals. Okay, I can see that this is probably it. So thanks a lot for your attention. Ready to answer your questions and maybe ask how many forest belts have you planted over your life or restored over your life. Ms. Valentyna, thank you. It's a pleasure to listen to you. To start with, forest belts. In Kherson, where I'm from originally, we have a lot of forest belts. They're full of wild acacia, and such forest belts are perfect for pheasants, because pheasants, they live on trees where they hide from predators, and we use this tree a lot. It's a long living tree. It's a very drought resistant. It produces honey to a certain extent. So maybe we could include this tree into your presentation as well. Yeah, it's the worst one. I know it's what it's called. It's called Acacia the Terrible. As for this tree, it's there's a reason. There's a reason why it's called terrible. It's it has a lot of spikes, these honey locust, as we call it as well, or thorny locust. It has a lot of thorns with very long thorns. And a pheasant would be able to walk in between these in between these thorns, and it knew that we wouldn't be able to reach it even. But this honey locust, in our in our conditions that are more moist, more humid, in our in our northern territories, it's not going to produce as many thorns, but it's going to be an invasive tree from the southern areas. I think it's great for it to be in Kherson, but let it stay there. We will plant our own plants in here. There was another question related to can I start with the question from the bottom? We had a lot of park areas, but it's all covered with grass lawns. Nobody, people keep removing trees. Can we change something? Yeah, I know this problem. I know this problem. We need to look into laws. That the law is called Rules on Tending to Green Gardens from 1980, and it's a very well written law. Because from the ecological point of view, it has very well written rules on this area, and it says that the places where leaves need to be removed from are only from areas that are visible in public. From those areas that don't have any ceremonial role, it has to be maintained there. Sure, a great area has to be covered with wooden belts, but forest belts. But unfortunately, in Ukraine, it's being destroyed. Can we use these? Or can we get some sort of a? Okay, let's talk about Pavlovnia. Pavlovnia. It's been promoted a lot, but it's an invasive tree. Its mycorrhiza, it spreads its mycorrhiza. It doesn't accept our mycorrhiza, and in very rare occasions, I could see that Pavlovnia grows in a heat trap and produces the expected results. So it's expected to grow quickly and be thick, but unfortunately, it has holes in it. The leaves that fall from it, that's great, very nice, but more than once I saw that it grows for a season, then the upper part dies off and it starts growing from the bottom again, from the roots again. So we can have some native trees instead of Paulownia. What we wanted to achieve from it, wood and leaves, but we have our trees. During the Soviet times, they moved invasive plants from the south, eucalyptus, that were very fast growing, really good wood. They were resistant to up to minus 20 degrees of cold, and they were grown even in nearby in Moscow. It took 20 years for a tree of 30 centimeters diameter to grow, and they had the best prospects in this regard. So this work has already been done, so we can use that experience. Okay, another question. I'll use this as well. Tending to rules on tending of green gardens. Tending to green gardens. This is a law that our ecological authority in Kiev doesn't want to adhere to because they have their own interests. Okay, so thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Valentyna, for this resourceful presentation in the first place, and then also for answering all these questions. And there have been many more. So I suppose we can continue discussion also later on in our discussion slot. But I think we have 4 minutes left.
Yeah,
So in
we
case we
still
want
have
to,
4 minutes,
raise
so we
them,
can continue.
we could continue. Esther in Ukraine in the chat, if you don't mind probably reading those out.
Yeah, I think that Valentyna already went through most of these questions. Yeah, I mean that it was like some general comments about an illegal cutting of shelter belts and like what to do, like whom to call, which authority to call to stop this practice. And also the second, maybe it's also related question. It's about harvesting of fallen leaves in parks. So this is illegal, but how to address this issue and which authority to communicate to?
Okay, as for gathering fallen leaves in parks, it's also the crime against those same parks. And in this law that I've mentioned before, it provides details on this matter. If there are any indications for, okay, if this park does not envisage gathering leaves in big piles, and that's any park apart from those located nearby government buildings. So that has ceremonial role, or where wind would blow the leaves out to roads or tracks. If it's not of any of those parks, then we provide grooves around the tree trunks up to 1 meter wide, and those grooves are filled with leaves, and the leaves keep playing the same role there. But it's easier for people to gather those leaves, and our Zelenbud authority, the landscaping and environmental authority of Kiev, they produce compost in their own areas, and supposedly brings it back and fertilizes the trees. But I'm struggling in communication with the Kiev Municipal Authority and the environmental authority, and they keep referencing to the law, and they keep mentioning that we are doing everything to the as by the book. But the law says that you shouldn't take any leaves out. So that's a problem. Another law that fails to work in Ukraine. It's a great law, but doesn't work. Okay, do we have any more questions? All right.
I think that now we can finish this amazing present part, a very informative one, and have a short 10-minute break. up to 10:40 German time and 11:40 Ukrainian time, and continue with our next presenter.